No, I think you're right. And I think the Tea Party is wrong to attribute the problem to spending. Right? I think they see spending as a proxy for government out of control. And I agree government's out of control, but it's not it's not just spending that there's a problem with. It's a regulation, it's the design of the way the government's in places, and it's the idea that Republicans support tariffs on sugar. Like what in the Republican platform supports the idea of protecting 6 domestic sugar manufacturers? This is not because of an obsession with spending. It's because of the obsession with campaign funding. And that's campaign funding as it's developed with lobbyists in the middle supporting this addiction that candidates on both the left and the right have to campaign funding. That is the core problem here. Thoreau said, for every 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil, there is one striking at the root. We need a generation of root strikers from both the left and the right who begin to point to what is the problem here and do something about it.
And you believe that there is a possibility of a coalition of people from the left and the right because, as you know, Professor, we're at a time in our society when we stop talking almost entirely to people who we don't agree with.
Because the business model doesn't support it. If you're Fox News, your media people tell you you've got to stay focused on your right-wing message or else you lose audience. And on in MSNBC, they're going to tell them the same thing. I mean, we have a real problem because we've lost the age of broadcasting where people can actually speak broadly to America. In 1969, when Spiro Agnew attacked the news media, 50% of American families watched one of 3 news programs every single night. 50%, right? We have nothing close to that today. So this is a fundamental problem with how we get information out there. But I do believe, because we've done extensive polling, that on the right and the left, people believe money is at the core of the problem. And what we need is somebody who can begin to connect the dots for them and convince people on the right that this is blocking them from getting what they want, and people on the left this is blocking them from getting what they want. And so we might not have common ends, but we have a common enemy, and we have to focus attention on that enemy.
Except, Professor, nothing you're saying could be argued with, I think. But there's an arms race. And the arms race requires unilateral disarmament to end.
Not necessarily.
Well, but if the president, your former colleague at the University of Chicago Law School, the president of the United States is about to mount a $1 billion re-election campaign, unchecked. Is a Republican candidate, any Republican candidate, going to say, I believe what Lawrence Lessig and the other reformers say, we're going to stand down on raising the kind of money or taking the kind of money, and therefore put ourselves at a terribly unfair competitive disadvantage?
I'm not sure it's a competitive disadvantage. I think if a candidate went out there and said, I'm going to take no more than $100 from any citizen, and I'm not going to take any PAC money, and I'm going to be free to lead. I
thought that was Obama.
I was a big supporter of Barack Obama. I loved who he was. I knew him when he wasn't a politician. But he has not delivered on this commitment. He absolutely has not. But I think if weirdly, it's a Nixon goes to China-like dynamic. If it's a Republican who says, I'm taking no more than 100 from any citizen, and I'm not taking any corporate money, I'm not taking any PAC money, in the age of the internet, that has a potential.
Is self-financing okay in that mix?
Yeah, I think it is.
So a John Huntsman, just to pick a name out of the air, who a former governor of Utah, could self-finance several times over. If he were to say, because I have the resources to self-finance a campaign, and I'm going to allow the Lessig plan to be my plan, would that be viewed by you as a sufficient
Well, I think
reform?
that somebody like that should say, it's a terrible political system where only extremely rich people can afford to run. So I don't accept the system where only very rich people can run. But the one thing we know about Huntsman or Bloomberg or any of these people is that nobody bought them. They bought themselves, right? So to the extent people are cynical because they think that politicians say one thing, but they're actually marionettes being controlled by somebody else, that's not true for the self-funded candidate.
So you believe the Huntsmans and the Bloombergs of the world are in a position to say, we're not going to take corporate money, we're not going to take PAC money, and as a result, we're not going to be beholden to anybody, and you believe it?
Well, I don't know if I would believe it about anybody, and I think it's much more credible if it's not somebody who has that kind of personal resources who makes this kind of commitment. But I think the challenge is, if we had that kind of candidate, and we saw that candidate credibly making every issue about the money, and the rest of us did our work to convince the rest of America that we need to understand this is the message that has to be pushed, I think there's a chance that that could actually work this time. And $1 billion by Barack Obama, looks very cheap compared to that kind of authentic message.
Is this the big issue in the next election or the next series of elections, money in politics? We think that there's the war 2 wars now going on, the possibility of a third war or third military involvement overseas, given all the unrest happening in the Middle East. We've got, economic problems at home, jobs and everything else. But you would say money in politics would be the thing that you focus on?
I would say, you poll Americans, money in politics, and ask them what's the most important issue. Money in politics is not in the top 10,
right.
Easily.
Yeah.
But I think that, in fact, if you want to understand a huge chunk of the craziness inside of our government, this is the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so making people understand, connect the dots to what they think about and what they see in our government, this could be made the critical issue. And I think we're only going to get to a place where we have confidence in our government to make very serious decisions when we can actually trust the government. And we don't trust this government. The last Gallup poll found 11% of the American public trusted Congress. 11%, right? There were more people who believed...
It's a historic low, right?
Yeah, more people who believed in King George III at the time of the Revolution than who believe in our Congress today, right? So this institution is institutionally bankrupt.
Yeah.
And what we have to recognize is in the face of this bankruptcy, what do we do to fix it? Now, there are very serious problems. But I think of this like, I think of alcoholism, right? So you can think of the alcoholic who could be losing his wife, he could be losing his liver, he could be losing his job. Those are the most important problems a person could face. But what we all know is that alcoholic will not solve any of those problems until he deals with his alcoholism first. Right. And that's the same thing with this republic.
Hack at the root.
Hack at the root.